With 24 years later coming out this week, I thought it might be a good time to go ahead and revisit the first two movies. So we're going to review 28 Days and Weeks Later, first with Days. So let's go. 28 Days Later stars Cillian Murphy, Naomi Harris, and is directed by Danny Boyle.
So who are you?
I wake up today in hospital. I wake up and I'm hallucinating.
I've got some bad news.
What's up, guys? Welcome to a special catalog review for 28 Days Later. Kind of a landmark movie that came out in 2002, but was actually filmed before 9/11. And I think one of the shots actually took place on 9/11, which is kind of interesting. But this is also one of the very first films shot almost entirely digitally. Because remember, back then, most films were shot, on film. And 16 millimeter, 8 millimeter, and mostly 35 millimeter. So yeah, this is a unique film, and it's also kind of reinvented the zombie genre, even though it's not technically a zombie since they are living entities. They just have a virus. So you could call this like a virus movie, but we often kind of categorize it in the same wheelhouse as zombie movies, just kind of with a new spin, I guess. So first off, let's give you a quick plot synopsis on 28 Days Later. Cillian Murphy plays Jim. He just wakes up naked in this hospital and nobody is there. Sort of reminded me of the beginning of Resident Evil. And so terrifying to him, he walks outside of the hospital into the city streets of London, and it looks like it's just completely decimated. You can tell that something horrible has happened. But he's the only one walking out. Everybody else is either gone or dead. And then he walks up to this big station where he sees all these signs of people that are missing. And this was a scene, obviously, that was shot before 9/11. But with this movie coming out after 9/11, they thought the scene was kind of in poor taste. And Danny Boyle even stating that he probably wouldn't have filmed the scene if it had been after 9/11. But there is a scene before that where you see these activists and they go into this science lab, and you see these monkeys there. And they're wanting to free the monkeys, but this scientist comes in and he tells them, you do not want to do that because they have been infected. They have been experimenting on them and they wanted to learn. And this is a case where, Prometheus playing with fire, and careful what you wish for, or in today's terminology, fuck around and find out. And that's exactly what happens. This is probably the ultimate movie of that type. So throughout the movie, Jim, he's just trying to get to his parents at the beginning, and then he comes upon these two other characters, Selena and Mark. There's a scene immediately after he finds these two. They take the time to actually build the characters of Selena and Mark. And they do that for a reason, because there's a shocking scene where Mark is infected and Selena wastes zero time disposing of him because she knows what they are up against. Selena's a very hardened character. We don't know exactly everything that happened in her past, but we know that she is quite seasoned in terms of dealing with the rage, even explaining to Jim what he is up against. Alex Garland actually wrote the script for this, and he does such a great job of building these characters and setting the table as to what type of characters they are. Jim, he's very wet behind the ears. He's discovering all of this, whereas you got a character like Selena, who is just extremely hardened and really cold, actually. And so really this movie, you're kind of witnessing it through Jim's eyes, going from, character to character as he tries to make his way through this sort of apocalyptic setting. And the movie really starts off as one thing, and you think they're really just focusing on the rage virus, but eventually the movie shines a light on really just human nature and how ugly we can become given these situations. There's a scene near the end of the movie where Jim, he sort of becomes what he is fighting against in order to survive, because of the corrupt military that are just trying to survive, and they eventually want to breed the women so they can, I guess, repopulate. This movie says a lot about humanity. Let's talk about the actual filming of this movie, because I think that is definitely the elephant in the room when you're watching it. I think if you have the Blu-ray of this movie, which I do, you might be turned off. And I remember back in the day when this came out on Blu-ray, people were complaining that the picture quality was horrible. No, that's intentional because it was shot on DV cams. Pretty much 95% of this movie is shot that way. There are two different scenes that are shot differently. One shot in 16mm, which is the flashbacks for Jim and his parents. And then the very end of the movie is shot in 35mm, when we kind of fast forward a little bit after the events of what has happened. And I think this movie's just a lesson that no matter how low the budget or lower grade the equipment, you can still make a great movie and kind of use that equipment as, you know, its purpose. Danny Boyle wanted this movie to look like it's being filmed by the viewer as they're watching, you know, these atrocities happen. It's like a documentary style almost. And after watching this, I've seen it so many times, I kind of understand why he shot it this way. Like if you shot this movie in 35mm the whole way, yeah, it probably would have been entertaining, but the digital video aspect just really adds another layer to the movie. And I think because of Danny Boyle's expertise in blocking shots and setting up shots with different rigs, because that's all here. Every shot is still planned out thoroughly. And there are some very creative shots in this movie. A lot of low angle shots. The frame is rarely ever centered and straight on. Oftentimes it's cocked and it's jarring, and it's just to put the viewer in an uneasy state. This movie beautifully does that. And I think it helps with the character building, if I'm being honest. You know, it helps the actor to actually become that character in the viewer's mind. And I think that DV cam aspect really adds to the horror of the movie. There are some downright terrifying sequences involving the rage virus. You know, just the shot choices that Danny Boyle had, you know, sometimes they're like definitely head on, like you just see the red eyes of them, but it'll be like just a single spliced in frame to freak you out. And then also just the running aspect, you know, they are running towards the viewer oftentimes in the shadows. You see the shadows of them instead of actually seeing them run. You know, the tunnel sequence where the characters get a flat tire. I remember watching that for the first time, and it is just a very jarring scene, very terrifying scene. But there's also a lot of emotional moments too. When you got Frank and Hannah, Frank sort of loses his temper. He's frustrated at the situation. You know, they're trying to find safety because he's got a daughter he's got to take care of. But there's that one scene where he looks up and he sees this crow, and then a drop of rage virus blood goes into his eyeball. Just something as simple as that. And immediately you feel so many different emotions. You feel fear because this is a father, but you also feel that emotion, you know, like, oh my God, this just went from a beautiful situation with these characters to an absolute nightmare. And the last thing he says to her is, before he knows he's about to turn, is he's like, Hannah, I love you. I need to let you know that I love you. And then, you know, he's fighting for her to just get away from him. Really, really moving stuff. So this movie just captures such a whirlwind of emotions for the viewer. It's one of the most effective, I'll just call it zombie-like movies I've ever seen. And in the more action-oriented scenes, it moves at just a breakneck pace, but it also slows down when it needs to for, you know, the great character-building moments. It's a very different movie than Weeks, and I think oftentimes people seem to prefer this movie over Weeks, but if you prefer Weeks, I completely understand that, because again, that's a much bigger, more epic style movie, but it still has the heart and emotion, which we will go into that when we get into that review. But overall, I think this is a very, very important film. I do think there are a couple of slow moments in the movie, but still super high purchase worthy for this. And I've even done a commentary on the movie quite a few years ago, which you can check out. I'll put a card here for that, but yeah, 28 Days Later, what a freaking great movie, and fantastic performances all around. So let me know what you guys think of 28 Days Later in the comments. Looking forward to hearing them. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day on Fridays. Review for Fridays. Follow me on Drumdums on my socials. Support me on Patreon. Buy me a coffee, and you guys, thank you. Support me on Patreon. Become a channel member. Buy me a coffee, and you guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a good day, and Drumdum out.